Now, Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm is taking action after being labelled an angry white male in a newspaper last week. He's lodged a complaint with the Human Rights Commission in a bid to repeal Section 18C of Australia's Racial Discrimination Act, which he believes suppresses free speech. Now, Section 18C makes it illegal to commit an act that is reasonably likely to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate someone. And Senator Leyonhjelm joins us now to explain why angry white males everywhere should consider themselves an oppressed minority. David, help us out here. What exactly are you so offended about? Is it the angry bit? Is it the white bit? Is it the male bit?
I'm not angry and I don't regard myself as an oppressed minority. What I'm seeking to establish is that what Mark Kenny wrote about me in an article in a newspaper is unlawful under Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. Now, I want that section of the Racial Discrimination Act repealed because it intrudes the law into feelings, just feelings, nothing else. And so I'm using it to highlight the absurdity of it.
So, Senator, you're bringing this action to demonstrate that the law is too vast and is ridiculous. If you bring this action and you lose, will you admit that Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act is not the limitation on free speech that you're claiming it is?
No, all I'll admit is that my particular case failed.
Right, and so if you do that and ultimately if you fail, doesn't that mean the law simply isn't as restrictive as you're saying it is?
No, all it means is the law is, in my particular case.
Thank you, Senator Peris. Senator Leyonhjelm.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to tell you a story about Foamy the sheep. Foamy debuted in People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals' recent attack on Australia's wool industry. Cradled in the...
Thanks very much for watching. I talk a lot about balancing the book.
And as promised before that story, which actually ended up being an interesting one. Here it was, me thinking it was some rap battle off. It was a legal stoush. There you go. I'm joined now by Liberal Democrats Senator David Leyonhjelm. Thanks for your company.
Thank you.
Budget's coming up. We've now got the Treasurer seemingly saying that he can't necessarily guarantee a surplus by 2021, or before then, certainly. Your thoughts on that?
No great surprise. They really won't bite the bullet on spending. Middle-class welfare in particular, they squealed and yelled and carried on, had to be blackmailed before they cut off childcare for people earning more than $350,000. There's just no appetite there for winding back spending where it really matters. And their experience in the Senate in the 2014...
I mean, I know that this isn't all spending cuts, but we see the reports in The Australian today in relation to welfare hit to target cheats. We see the fees going up for higher education for students as a policy that has also been earmarked, I think, in the Weekend Australian as the splash. So they're doing things, whether you agree with them or not, but then all of a sudden they're not touching middle-class welfare.
Correct. Yeah, so...
Is that a vote thing?
Yeah, well, they're going for the safe areas, so there's no votes to be lost chasing welfare cheats. Not even Labor will protest about that, or probably not even the Greens, if truth is told.
I wouldn't go that far, but
no,
you never know.
You never know. Yeah, that's right. Higher education. I mean, they had the battle in 2014 about making students pay more. Well, actually, borrow more, really, because it's all funded by HECS. And Simon Birmingham's never disguised the fact that he'd like to do something about that, winding back the very wealthy status of most of the universities. I'm hoping that he'll get somewhere this time, but this is a battle still to be had. I'd also like to see him carry on a bit further with this.
Senator Leyonhjelm.
Thank you.
Senator Leyonhjelm.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. I rise today to object to passage. All right. On another issue, what is the gender workplace hours gap? The agency reports a workplace gender pay gap comparing male full-time employees and female full-time employees. But male full-time employees work longer hours on average than female full-time employees. and the agency doesn't account for this when reporting the workplace gender pay gap.
Using ABS data on employee earnings and hours, the gender pay gap as at May 2016 was 15.7%. It is a survey of employees, that information from the ABS. It's not a census. And it's only conducted every 2 years. They only collect the data every 2 years. What we do is we annualise our figure to full-time. So we look at all part-time employees and full-time employees that may have worked part of a 12-month period, and we annualise that data to take into account part-time hours. So therefore we're converting the part-time hours to full-time, if you like.
So do you take into account the fact that on average a male full-time employee works longer hours than a female full-time employee?
Not directly, no.
You don't?
But we annualise the part-time hours and those that have worked full-time but for part of the year. So that way, because at the moment, what I can tell you is women work part-time at 3 times the rate of men. Mm. So by annualising it, we are looking at a more realistic...
So you base it on annual salary?
Yeah.
What about if you did it on an hourly rate? What would be the gender hourly pay gap?
Well, we don't have that data, Senator.
You don't have that data?
No, because we ask for annualised salaries from our employers when they report their data in.
Okay, so if a woman was working fewer hours but earning the same rate per hour as a man doing the same job, would that show up as a gender pay gap?
No.
But, well then in that case you are looking at hourly rates.
That would be checkmate.
Jenny Imbudu, Research and Analytics Executive Manager. So we do not collect the real hours that an employee might have worked. So what we do collect is the hours that are specified in a contract, and that is provided by organisations to us.
I would say.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, yeah. But I mean, do you annualise it on the assumption that men and women are working the same number of hours, or is it actual earnings?
It's actual earnings, and we are unable to. We don't have the data to distinguish or to then adjust for hours, because we cannot collect the real hours that employees are working.
So it's not possible to tell whether any or some of the gender pay gap is just simply attributable to a different number of hours worked. Is that right?
It depends on whether we're looking at hours that are in contract, or whether we're looking at hours that employees worked as, overtime.
Why is it you don't look at hours worked? You don't collect it, but the ABS does. It's available.
The ABS does a survey, yes.
Every 2 years.
Yes.
But again, as I say, we collect census data, that is survey data. And the other thing I would say at this stage, Senator, is just because somebody might be sitting at their desk for 12 hours a day doesn't mean you're getting 12 hours of productivity out of them, and doesn't mean that they're working in essence any harder than someone that may sit at their desk for 8 hours. So I don't think...
That's true, but they're getting paid for the 12 whether they're doing any work, or they're getting paid for however many hours they're sitting at their desk. And the issue for your agency is that if it's a male sitting at a desk, they're getting paid more than a female sitting at a desk. So the question is whether that, irrespective of the hours, the question is whether for those hours for which they're getting paid, is there a difference between men and women?
Orange man bad.
So
we don't collect information on ours, Senator.
ABS does, so it's available. So if we put in a question on notice, will you access the ABS data and so you can answer that question?
Well, I did answer it earlier. I said that the ABS employee and earnings and hours data, as at May 2016, the gender pay gap was 15.7%.
That, if I understood you correctly, it's referring to annualised salary, is that right?
Not.
What's the gap based on? Per hourly rates or annual incomes or annualised incomes, or what are we talking about here?
Okay. The EEH data, so that's the employee earnings and hours data, includes all employees regardless of employment status and reflects ordinary time cash earnings. The EEH survey produces hourly earnings for non-managers and can be used to produce a gender pay gap measure inclusive or exclusive of part-time employees. The EEH data can also be configured in a variety of other ways that are useful to the gender pay gap estimates, e.g. managerial versus non-managerial employees. The big drawback from where we sit is that EEH data was identified as being, is just done on a 2-year cycle.
I don't think I can think of many men who would find it acceptable that a woman, irrespective of how many hours she's working in the day, if she's doing the same amount of work as a man, or the same job as a man, I'm sorry, was paid any less on the basis that she's a woman. I can't think of any men who would support that. And yet, because you're not looking at hours, we don't know whether that's occurring or not. Am I right there?
Senator, I think at this stage, as I've said to you, we are unable to collect and analyse that data. There are other countries, of course, that do that, and we will...
Not even every 2 years with the ABS survey data? You could do it at least every 2 years.
And I gave you the figure of 15.7% based on the calculation that we last did.
What's the 15.7 reflect?
So what I was about to say, Senator, is I'm happy to take that question on notice and go back and look at that last calculation that we did and provide you with the workings on that.
Quick question for all the women. Can you all raise your hand real quick?
This is hilarious.
Of all of those women that have their hands raised,
Yeah, I'm watching this.
Touched on this a couple of times in previous questions, so I'm not sure I understood you. You've said the quickest way to close the gender pay gap would be for each employer to analyse their own staff. Would that reveal unequal pay for equal work?
It would, Senator.
So you think that's a primary contributor to... so in other words, men and women doing the same work receiving different pay?
It is one of the contributors, but I mean it's a legal requirement for all organisations to pay people the same regardless of...
I'm aware of that, yeah, so I'm interested to what your view is on how many people are breaking the law on that.
That is something that we cannot measure in the data that we collect, which is why we actively encourage all employers to do their own gender pay gap analysis. And in doing their own gender pay gap analysis, we ask them to measure 3 things. We ask them to measure the like-for-like pay gaps that may exist in their organisations. We ask them to measure their bi-level gaps.
Their what level?
Bi-level, which is organisations looking at salary bands, if you like, so to ensure that that people within a salary band are being paid equitably. And the other thing we look is the organisational wide pay gap, which looks at, again, the distribution of things like women and men in the different management roles and different roles throughout the organisation. So we ask them to do all three of those because it is that information that comes out of doing those three different analyses that you are able to get a true picture of what is going on in each organisation.
So if you took some predominantly female occupations like childcare or primary school teaching, and there was a substantial increase in males working in those sectors and obviously earning the same pay as the women, what would that do to the statistics? Would there be a reduction in the gender pay gap because men were earning those that, especially childcare is a relatively low paid occupation? Would that change the aggregate statistics on the gender pay gap?
I would have to, until that happens, I can't tell you, Senator.
But you arrive at your statistics. You must know what goes into those statistics.
We haven't done any modelling around that, Senator. If that
would you like to take that on notice? I mean, my question is quite a genuine one. If the statistics are measuring unequal treatment, that's one thing. If it's measuring different choices made by men and women in terms of their jobs, that's a different thing. So what I'm wondering is if there were a lot more men in childcare, that would be a good example. It's not a high-paid occupation, and it's overwhelmingly women employed in it. What would that do to the statistics that you're capturing and your calculation of the gender pay gap? You're nodding there. I wonder whether you have an answer.
Jenny Breeder, who've done the Research and Analytics Executive. Senator, if we haven't done proper modelling on it, so I can't give you an exact answer. Indication would be that if we have, as we measure the average, the average could then lead to a decrease in the gender pay gap. And as we know from the KMPG report, occupational segregation contributes to the gender pay gap. But as I said before,
but we haven't done the modelling, and to be frank, I mean, we don't have resources to do modelling. We do analysis of the data that we collect.
Yeah, no, I'm not criticising you for not having done it. There's a question as to what you're measuring or what the calculation of the gender pay gap can be attributed to. If it's due to the fact that men and women are being discriminated against in terms of pay, which is illegal, that would be a concern. If it's a consequence of the occupational choices that women make, then that's perhaps less of a concern. That's where I'm heading with this.
And I get that, Senator, but I would also say it is a contributing factor. It is not the contributing factor. We know that there are a number of contributing factors to the gender pay gap.
All right. So I'm going to be quick, as I usually am here. So currently you're capturing data or reporting data based on males and females. Are you under any pressure? Do you have any sense that in due course you will need to capture data on other genders, transsexuals and intersex?
The Act is very clear. The Act is very clear. This is about collecting data around women and men, and that is all we collect on, and that is all we can collect on under the Act.
Okay, thank you.
What's this one about?
This one is established to advance gender equality and improve the lives of Australian women. I'm just wondering, would you consider your work to be undermined if there was also an office for men?
It's called Parliament, Senator Leyonhjelm. Thank you, Senator. We work towards gender equality, and certainly there are times when policy response would necessarily involve addressing the needs of men in that.
Would your work be assisted if there was an office for men?
Senator Leyonhjelm, I'm just conscious probably should be asking officials for an expression on a matter of policy.
That's not
whether
a policy,
there should
that's
be,
an operational question.
whether there should be another department sounds to me like a question of policy.
No, it's not. It's a question of operational effectiveness.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Would your work be assisted if there was an office for men?
We would work with across government, so certainly those issues would be well, you know, yes, of course we would work with them.
There's a one of your objectives is ensuring that women and their children are safe from violence. Would an office for men that ensured that men and their children were safe from violence be complementary or competitive to your office?
It would be complementary.
Complementary, all right.
You realise most perpetrators are men. That's kind of the point.
Senator Leyonhjelm didn't interject during your questions. I'll ask you to do the same.
Because they weren't inflammatory, they were substantive. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Is there any discomfort or concern within your office about the absence of any focus on men at all?
There is a focus on men in terms of a range of issues. So we certainly focus on issues to do with encouraging more men to use flexible work to be more involved with their families.
To say that again?
To be more involved with their, so that they take up more of the unpaid or the caring responsibilities in their homes.
Are there any instances where your office could be seen to be improving the lives of Australian women at the expense of Australian men?
Oh, God.
I don't believe so.
Okay, good. So you have an objective of advancing gender equality. By what metric would you measure gender equality?
There are a range of metrics that include economic metrics, so the details that we were discussing earlier around women's workforce participation, so their economic security. They're measuring the gender pay gap, looking at their ability to save for their retirement and to have assets in retirement. Are important economic indicators. We certainly look at women in leadership positions, as we've just discussed too, on government boards, but we also look at the private sector as well. In terms of health and the government's funded initiatives, in terms of health outcomes and broader social outcomes, we certainly look at how gender equality is impacting issues such as family and domestic violence.
If gender equality was achieved by those measurement methods, would your office be wound down, do you think?
It's a matter for government, Senator.
Yes.
I think it's a matter for government, not for Ms Bergen.
Yeah, I guess that's probably true. What proportion of your staff in the office are men?
At the moment, we have approximately 25% of our office are men.
What proportion are Indigenous?
I believe we've just had one person that's just moved out, but we, at the moment, I believe, I would have to take that on notice. We have, I'm sure we have one, but yes.
But Asian descent?
Again, I'd have to take that on notice.
Aged over 60?
Almost one.
I'm just wondering if your office would be either helped or assisted or undermined if there are officers for each of those groups.
I don't think that's not for me to comment.
Operationally, I'm not talking about a policy question.
Operationally, we would work with those areas. We certainly work very closely with Indigenous Affairs colleagues in the outcome 2 for this department.
Okay. All right, I think I'm just about on 6.
middle-aged, straight, cisgender male, some people claim I am guilty of white privilege, age privilege, gender privilege and male privilege. That's what Senator David Leyonhjelm wrote in his opinion piece for the Daily Telegraph. Now, this is something that I can relate to rather well and something I found to be rather true. As the Senator went on to say, taking offence is the new black, everybody's doing it. The offenderati and the victimhood industry in this country, they are so very active, aren't they? We've all got outrageitis. Everyone's got a black armband on about something, their virtue signalling about the plight of some disenfranchised group rather than actually fixing it. They're censoring the opposition that comes from so-called privileged people. And the other one that I've discovered of late is this idea that there is, in fact, only one opinion. You know, we've got to come to this one opinion. It is absolutely bizarre. Look, the extent, you'll remember this, to which political correctness has become divisive, in fact so stupid, was on full display yesterday. I told you about this University of Melbourne performance that has what they call a divisive dance performance. You know what it is, where white patrons are asked to stay in the foyer. You've got to sign some bit of paper, and when you do, you can then enter and see the Indigenous performance. If enough white people do this and enter the room where the performance is taking place to celebrate, the performance stops. It's all about segregation. It's just, the whole thing is completely and utterly laughable. So let's have a chat about this with Senator David Leyonhjelm, who's on the line. Senator, trust you well?
I'm well, thank you, Luke.
Now, this story from Melbourne, mate, I don't know if you've read the entirety of it, but gosh, if this isn't the extreme end of stupidity, I don't know what is. The idea that if you're white, you can't sit in there and watch the performance until such time as you've gone through some process outside of the theatre where you, I don't know, recognise something.
Yes, this is based on the white privilege notion that you are born with privilege because of your colour, and that therefore somehow or other you have to atone for it. It's a little bit like the religious concept of original sin. You're born sinful and you have to live a life, a sin-free life, in order for God to forgive you. You know, you're guilty before you've even started. It's a peculiar thing because, of course, there's no such thing as black privilege or brown privilege or Asian privilege or Indian privilege or anything like that. It's only whites who are guilty of this white privilege and this unconscious bias, this race-based unconscious bias that you hear tossed around all the time. It is inherently racist itself because, of course, it distinguishes us, people, human beings, on the basis of race, and that's the core of racism. That's what underlines it. And so it's saying, well, because of your colour, I am entitled to make assumptions about you. I'm entitled to treat you in a certain way. I'm entitled to require you to do things if you want to come and see my play, for example. That is racism. It is absolutely racism. But, of course, there are some people who will argue you can't be a racist unless you are white. The only people in the world who are racist are white. You hear that. You will hear that from time to time. But which is really peculiar because, of course, there was this controversy not so long ago, well, several years ago, when the West Indians were playing cricket in India, and there were heaps of Indians in the stand acting like monkeys, doing monkey signs, and of course that's a seriously racist thing to do.
Yes.
And they're brown people; they're not white people, in the commonly accepted sense of the word. So of course this idea that only white people can be racist is just factually wrong, and it's offensive to us as well.
And the other thing that we get too is it not that, for example, Jed Carney, she was looking at a group of electoral officials and she commented, "Oh, look at them, white middle-aged males." Now, I don't know what would happen. Well, in fact, I do have a fair idea if I referred to a collective of black, young women and made that point based on their colour, their age and their gender. Why is it that you can have a crack at the white, let's say, middle-aged male? It was something that Sarah Hanson-Young referred to a year or two back when she was caught out I think allegedly taking a kid whale watching in a helicopter or something like that. I made the point on social media, I hasten to add, to Tim Supamasan, is it acceptable? And of course you just get ignored, because that is the case, isn't it? That if you want to have a crack at someone, so long as they're white or middle-aged or male, it'll just be, no dramas. It'll just be brushed through.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the insulting bit of it is male, pale and stale.
Yeah.
And yes, they toss it around, but it's a substitute for thinking. It's a substitute for argument, you know. The people who use those sorts of arguments are not very bright. The reason they use those arguments is because they can't think of anything that's rational. So tossing around insults is the sort of resort that they end up at. Of course, as soon as you analyse that sort of thing rationally, it's saying, okay, well, are all white people the same? Are all middle-aged people the same? Or are all male people the same?
Yeah.
You treat them all collectively in that fashion. Do you arrive at a logical conclusion? The answer is, of course, no, you don't, because we're all different. We're all individuals.
Yeah.
That's the difference between the socialists, the collectivists, if you like, and there are a lot of them around these days, and those of us who say we are each individuals, all have our own inherent strengths and weaknesses, and to attribute qualities to us based on those sort of collective identifiers is just profoundly wrong. It's also misleading, of course, because of the differences.
Yeah, exactly.
And thank you. Foreign Minister Julie Bishop is the latest federal MP to come under scrutiny for travel expenses. It's been revealed Miss Bishop spent $2,716 of taxpayers' money to attend a polo match in Victoria. But her office is defending the trip, saying Ms Bishop was invited and attended.
I recently asked the Workplace Gender Agency, Equality Agency, a written question on notice. I asked what was the workplace safety gap, and you replied that the agency doesn't collect data on workplace safety. Do you recall that?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. So, as I understand it, the agency's legislation requires it to promote and improve gender equality in employment and in the workplace. So it would seem to me, and I ask you to confirm this, that whether or not people return home from work alive and well and whether women, and the fact that women return from work home to home alive and well far more reliably than men do, might be a gender equality issue in employment and in the workplace. Is that not the case?
Senator, we collect data on six gender equality indicators that are prescribed by the Act.
Does the Act prevent you from collecting data on workplace safety in relation to gender equality?
We collect data on the 6 gender equality indicators, and I can read them out for you if you would like, Senator. And currently, none of those cover safety. We collect data on the gender composition of the workforce, the gender composition of governing bodies or of relevant employers, equal remuneration between women and men, the availability and utility of employment terms, conditions and practices relating to flexible working arrangements for employees, to working arrangements supporting employees with family and caring responsibilities. We collect data on the consultation that employers do with employees on issues concerning gender equality in the workplace, and we collect data on sex-based harassment and discrimination. They're the 6 gender equality indicators as stated under the Act, Senator.
Are you prevented from doing anything else beyond that?
That's a matter for government. It's quite prescriptive as to what we collect data on.
I wonder whether if you took a greater interest in workplace safety and specifically deaths on at work, of which men comprise the overwhelming majority, you may end up closing the gender pay gap because more women would be in workplaces that are currently dominated by men. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, certainly BHP's example shows us that more women will work in what were traditionally male-dominated work sites with a redesign of equipment and whatever. Whether there's a direct correlation between that and lowering the gender pay gap, I couldn't tell you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President.
What's your take on female quotas in political parties?
Oh, I've got no time for that. We in the Liberal Democrats treat people as individuals, not as members of a collective. So we don't have policies specific to women, specific to race, specific to gender or sexual preference or anything like that. We treat people strictly as individuals. We do not go along with collectivist concepts. So this gender identity stuff, for example, or identity politics stuff, we're dead against that because all it does is classify people according to some collective notion, and it totally disregards their attributes or lack of them as individuals. And Martin Luther King put it very accurately when he said he wants his children to be judged by the strength of their character, not by the colour of their skin. And he might as easily have said, or by their gender, or by their sexual preference. Individualism is the core of the libertarian philosophy of Liberal Democrats, and we don't make any exceptions for that at all.
The books, all the rest of it, and that there are other options for people who are conservatives, libertarians, or people who think that owing, $600 billion is way too much, that expenditure going up by 97% in 10 years is a problem. One of the people who is committed to trying to do something about it, he believes in a balanced budget, and if you want to have a look at it, all of it, it's on his website, would be the Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm, who joins us now from Canberra. Senator, don't you love it? They increased the credit card. Spending, as we've illustrated tonight, is 97% up on where it was 10 years ago. Nowhere near population growth, nowhere near business growth, nowhere near any sort of serious indices, yet most of the people who talk about politics in that building couldn't care less.
No, you're quite right. It's pretty sad. We're heading towards the cliff. We're not as close to the cliff as Greece or Italy or probably even America, although Trump might drag America back from the cliff. But you can certainly see the edge of the cliff from where we are. And if we don't do something about it, we will go over it, and it won't be pleasant. It'll be nasty.
So what does doing something about it look like for you?
Well, look, I've had an alternative budget in the Financial Review for the last 4 years, and this year, last year I talked about how everyone should take a haircut. So we've got deficits, we've got spending cuts required. We can't raise taxes anymore because they inhibit growth and you end up not raising much more money anyway. And so we have to share the load around. So in the 2016 alternative budget, I talked about everybody taking a little bit less. And if you spread a load around, there's no reason why it couldn't be quite tolerable. Nobody needs to suffer unduly. This year, I talked about the process of arriving at a budget. So I talked about bottom-up budgeting, which is something I'm very used to from business, from my background in business, where you basically say to everybody, don't assume that anything is going to continue the way it was last year. Start from the ground up, decide what you want to do, what you have to do, cost it, brick by brick by brick, and then that's your budget. And that's been done. It's a pretty painful process, I can tell you, but it's done every now and again in businesses with very good effects. You usually save at least 20 or 30% of costs. And interestingly enough, Jimmy Carter, probably perhaps now the second worst president that America's ever had, he actually did some bottom-up budgeting when he was president as well. Now the other way to approach it, well, you can do both of them, is top-down, where you decide this is how much money we've got to spend. This is the proportion of GDP we're going to spend, or the relationship with tax, or something like that. Just set a target, and then say to all the departments that want to spend the money, you work out, you fight amongst yourselves how to divide that up. But there's no more than this aggregate amount. Now New Zealand does exactly that, and they come up with balanced budgets pretty much every year. So that was my suggestion. Now I also would argue that this blaming the Senate, saying, oh, we can't get through our savings through the Senate, and they did do that in the budget papers. They blamed the Senate. So they've gone for the soft option of pinching all Labor's policies and implementing them, as you've been talking about it. It's nonsense. You know, there are some seriously easy, low-hanging fruit to save money that they could have grabbed onto. They're really not that good at persuading the public, or even persuading the Senate, that savings can be made. Middle-class welfare is the classic, absolute classic. They could have easily gone for means testing, or increasing means testing of benefits. Would have been impossible for Labor and the Greens and the crossbench to argue with it. And you know, there's billions to be saved in all that.
And there was that the story, of course, that Adam wrote based off a lot of the information that I know that you've been gathering for some time. There's $15 billion in the budget this year and every year to come that is welfare for foreigners. This is people, they're not living here. I mean, this is unbelievable here.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, that figure. I mean, I knew there was some, but I didn't realise it was that high. We got the Parliamentary Budget Office to cost that up. Not all of that $15 billion is salvageable if we cut off non-citizens from welfare. Some of that money, probably about a quarter to 20%, might be attributable to people who are from countries with which we have a bilateral social security agreement. So age and disability support pensions, if we live in their countries, we receive their pensions, and if they live in ours, they receive ours. But there's over 700,000 people who aren't from those countries who are receiving welfare, and they're not citizens. What are we doing that for? You know, that's $15 billion, well, probably $12 billion, $13 billion that I don't think we need to pay at all.
Yeah, now I want to ask about the obvious here, which is the shopping list of what you like and what you don't like, what you'll vote for, what you'll vote against. Do you know anything that if there was a vote tomorrow, you'd walk in and vote against it?
Oh, yes. The additional tax on the banks, the increase in the Medicare levy, the increase in cigar taxes and Rollies smokes. I need to put my glasses on just to check my notes, because there's one other there. Oh, there's a tax on employers who hire foreign workers. So they've said, well, we'll let you hire foreign workers still, which is important because they bring skills in that we don't have. But we're going to levy a tax on you, and now we're going to put that into traineeships and apprenticeships. The problem is, of course, that those companies which are employing those skilled temporary workers are not going to necessarily benefit from where that money is spent on traineeships and apprenticeships. It's just a tax on employment, basically. Now, I don't have a problem with giving Australians priority, but if you're going to let them in, there's no need to tax them when they do it.
Well, now look... yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so there's those are all the tax increases, and there's a number of spending initiatives that I find very questionable. The Sydney Airport I don't mind so much. Ultimately, that will result in competition between the Sydney existing airport and the new one, and that'll ultimately result in lower prices through competition. It was always a mistake, I think, when they privatised Sydney Airport, that they gave them first option over the second airport as well. But the inland rail, honestly, how on earth that could be justified in terms of taxpayers' money, I don't know. The private sector...
Senator Leyonhjelm.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. The proposition put forward in today's debate by the Greens is that Australia's coal exports are one of the most significant contributors to human-induced climate change globally. To assist debate, I'm actually going to try to put a figure on this contribution. Human-induced climate change, to the extent it occurs, is a function of cumulative anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, particularly carbon dioxide emissions, over at least the last 100 years. So first we need to recognise that for the first half of the last 100 years,
Thursday will mark 20 years.
Australia.
Senator, you also said that Australia's gun laws haven't made the slightest bit of difference. Now, in the 18 years leading up to the gun laws in 1996, an average of 617 people were killed by guns each year in Australia. Since that time, the average has fallen to 266 people. That's a significant difference. So how do you make that claim?
well, what was happening before 1996 was that the rate of firearm deaths was declining at a certain rate, had been for a couple of decades. After 1996, the rate continued to decline at the same rate. It did not, the rate of decline didn't change. So there's been a steady reduction in firearms deaths over many decades, probably about 40 years. 20 years before 1996, the rate was falling. 20 years after 1996, the rate was falling at the same level. So if you take 1996 and now, yes, there are fewer firearm deaths per year. That's true, but to claim that that was due to the Howard gun laws suggests that that wouldn't have happened anyway.
But I looked at all the figures for the years, and you say it's a steady decline. In fact, after a couple of years after the gun laws, it was quite a sharp decline, and it has remained at about, 1/3 the rate of deaths by guns in the years before the gun laws.
If you graph them on a long linear line and look at the rate of deaths per head of population, so you can't take absolute numbers because population's going up as well. If you take it as a rate per head of population, the rate before 1996 and the rate after 1996 in terms of decline of firearms-related homicides is exactly the same. Can I also pick you up on a point in your introduction? There's been no massacres in Australia. That's not using guns. That's not actually quite true. There's been quite a lot. Depends what you call a massacre, but we had 5 killed, the Hunt family, in 2014 in Lockhart, New South Wales. We've had lots of massacres involving 3 individuals.
Are you doing all of these with guns?
Yes, with guns. Yes, with guns. We've had plenty of them. This argument that since 1996 we've had no massacres, therefore it must be true, is not accurate.
Sam, how do you respond to that? Sorry, Sam, how would you respond to that?
Yes, well, the gun deaths were declining when 1996 occurred. However, they have accelerated since the gun laws were introduced. We have had no mass shootings in Australia since the gun laws have been introduced. We've had reductions in suicides, which was a huge gun problem in Australia. We've also had reduction in the number of handgun incidences across Australia. So it's been a very important aspect of our gun laws in Australia that we've had such a significant reduction in gun violence in this country.
Well, how do we define mass shootings is one question.
Given, you gave this pitch to the NRA saying that the US government shouldn't tighten their gun controls, but we've just seen another mass shooting over in the US yesterday, another 8 people killed. In the US, a person is times more likely to be killed by a gun than here in Australia. So, Mark, I'll put this to you. is that something we should be emulating? A lot of Australians are saying don't soften our gun control laws because we're going to end up like the US, where every week it's not even newsworthy anymore because they happen with such frequency.
Well, I think there are many fine aspects of American society, but if you ask the average Australian what's the very worst thing about the United States, they'd say the incidence of public shooting massacres. And Andrew was asking, how do we define a massacre? Well, David's quoting incidents there, tragic, that amount to murder-suicide within a family.
Domestic situation.
What's happened in Australia, if you define the massacre as happening in a public place, then up pre-1996 we had them in Australia, terribly, in shopping centres, at tourist attractions, most notably and tragically at Port Arthur. Since then, in the 20 years since, we haven't had a shooting massacre in a public place. Our schools have been safe, unlike the United States. Our shopping centres have been safe. Our tourist attractions have been safe, unlike America. I mean, this is a real benefit for public safety and well-being in Australia that we shouldn't possibly jeopardise by relaxing gun laws and going down the crazy path of the United States.
Rob Borsak, I mean, obviously we don't need to
amount to
8 people killed. In the US, a person is 20 times.
A significant reduction in, which was a huge gun. Yes, well, the
massacres in Australia. That's not using guns. That's right before suggests that there was that wouldn't have happened anyway.
But I looked at all the figures for the years, and you say it's a steady decline. In fact, after a couple of years after the gun laws, it was quite a sharp decline, and it has remained at about, you know, 1/3 the rate of deaths by guns in the years before the gun laws.
If you graph them on a long linear line and look at the rate of deaths per head of population, so you can't take absolute numbers because population's going up as well. If you take it as a rate per head of population, the rate before 1996 and the rate after 1996 in terms of decline of firearms-related homicides is exactly the same. Can I also pick you up on a point in your introduction? There's been no massacres in Australia. That's not using guns. That's not actually quite true. There's been quite a lot. Depends what you call a massacre, but we had 5 killed, the Hunt family, in 2014 in Lockhart, New South Wales. We've had lots of massacres involving 3 individuals.
Are you doing all of these with guns?
Yes, with guns. Yes, with guns. We've had plenty of them. This argument that since 1996 we've had no massacres, therefore it must be true, is not accurate.
Sam, how do you respond to that? Sorry. Sam, how would you respond to that?
yes, well, the gun deaths were declining when 1996 occurred. However, they have accelerated since the gun laws were introduced. We have had no mass shootings in Australia since the gun laws have been introduced. We've had reductions in suicides, which was a huge gun problem in Australia. We've also had reduction in the number of handgun incidences across Australia. So it's been a very important aspect of our gun laws in Australia. Had reduction in the number of handgun incidences across Australia. So it's been a very important aspect of our gun laws in Australia that we've had such a significant reduction in gun violence in this country.
Well, how do we define mass shootings is one question.
Given, you gave this pitch to the NRA saying that the US government shouldn't tighten their gun controls, but we've just seen another mass shooting over in the US yesterday.
That suggests that the public has no appetite for weakening gun laws?
No, I don't think that suggests that at all. Motivation for what really...
Oh, I'm streaming, by the way. Hang on, 2 seconds.
There were knee-jerk reaction laws at the time. Whether you believe, as I don't, that they were well-based is another issue.
Well, a lunatic got hold of a semi-automatic weapon and slaughtered innocent people.
Well, hang on a second. The semi-automatic weapons aren't there now, and what we're doing is we're debating...
thank goodness. Thank goodness.
And we're debating based on emotion, which is important, but we understand people who have been through that process, and we saw it the other day on the Insight program, that poor lady is still grieving. That poor lady is still physically and mentally suffering.
You would say, Sam, that the kind of rifles that we're talking about now in potentially loosening the gun laws can have much the same effect.
Out of them, we've come such a long
off period between applying for and purchasing a
gun. You can't
so
believe.
I think, well, I can.
You can't believe what John Howard says.
But I can believe him on that because he's done good for the country.
How would he know? How would he know?
Well, he says 4 states. Well, he's well connected inside the Liberal Party, obviously, and he says 4 states are looking at watering down the revisions.
David Leyonhjelm, do you want to say something?
Yes, look, the assumption about the Adler is...
Just hold on a second, Sam, sorry. We're just hearing from David.
The 28-day waiting period, and now we're having no criminal record checks for those who want a second or subsequent weapon.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
The assumption that the Adler shotgun introduces something new and more dangerous and so forth is utterly false. I don't mind people having their own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. You can't create your own facts. The Adler is a lever-action 12-gauge shotgun. They have been on the market in Australia for 100 years. 12-gauge shotguns have been around forever.
Yeah, but this rapid-fire style?
Yes, this is the 3rd on the market. The 3rd. It's not even the 1st of its kind. And the 5-shot magazine is widely available. Right. All they're arguing about is whether an extra 2 shots are going to make a difference.
Well, with respect, I don't care about the mechanics of that gun. I don't understand what you're saying in terms of how it works. But I look at that video and I say, why does anyone in Australia need to be able to fire off that many bullets that quickly? Well, who needs it?
Well, the why do you need it argument is very authoritarian. Why do you need a golf club? Why do you need anything? Why do you need a car?
You can kill a lot of people really quickly, like we're seeing in the US with a gun
Why do you need a car that goes over the speed limit? You can kill a lot of people very quickly with a car that goes over the speed limit.
This is why we need to examine what the basis of giving licences are all about, and why these guns are in the hands of good people, not Martin Bryant's. Okay, our gun laws were framed and are currently run on the basis that everyone who wants a gun legally, is tested, is background checked, is a lunatic.
No.
That's exactly the way it was based. And that's exactly the way it's based.
Like that.
We get treated that way.
No one says that about farmers. Farmers have got a legitimate need for guns.
But that's the way the gun laws are framed.
That's the way the gun laws are framed. A single bullet to kill a pig, a fox, a feral animal.
That's the way the gun laws are framed.
To acknowledge that there is a possibility.
1996 was framed on the basis of a rush of emotion and a political opportunist named John Howard.
Okay, but to acknowledge that there is a possibility that someone might be a lunatic is not to say that everyone is under suspicion of being a lunatic or that anyone is being accused of being a lunatic.
That's exactly the way the law is framed, and that's exactly the way it's run.
Well, Robert, the political opportunism here is people like Ricky Muir, who are running for re-election in the Senate, who's got out there and irresponsibly advertised this gun solely for the purpose to appeal to the shooters' vote in Victoria, where he's been a senator.
Tensions between the Prime Minister and his predecessor Tony Abbott were on full display in Question Time today. Mr Abbott complained he'd been grievously misrepresented over claims he'd done a so-called Guns for Votes deal with Senator David Leyonhjelm. Lateline political correspondent David Lipson joins us now from Canberra. David, how has the party reacted to this blow-up today?
Emma, again, Coalition MPs are going back to their electorates tonight with their tails between their legs and no one to blame but themselves. The issue of guns has dominated the week because Malcolm Turnbull couldn't give a quick and straight answer at the start of the week, and because throughout the week Tony Abbott has continued to deny that he had done a deal with David Leyonhjelm. The minister even got to his feet today in Question Time to confirm that he had been keeping then Prime Minister Abbott's office in the loop, and Malcolm Turnbull said in Question Time essentially that was good enough for him. All of that prompted Tony Abbott to get to his feet at the end of Question Time, launch a tirade ostensibly at Labor, but in the process at his own senior colleagues, also in the process giving a rousing speech, the likes of which we haven't seen for a very long time from the Coalition, that left some in his party literally thumping the table. Let's have a look.
I have made inquiries of my ministers, and I can say to the House that as a result of those inquiries I am satisfied that the Minister for Justice acted in the full knowledge of the Prime Minister's office at that time.
Does the member for Warringah claim to have been misrepresented?
Oh, most grievously, Mr Speaker. This is absolutely and utterly false. Labor is running a protection racket for the CFMEU. The bottom line, Mr Speaker, is you can always trust this coalition. You can only trust this coalition to keep our country safe.
This Prime Minister promised stable government, but you can tell he just couldn't wait to rip Tony Abbott a new one.
Well, so David, the COAG police ministers are meeting tomorrow. Is there any chance the ban on these Adler shotguns will be lifted?
The chance of the ban being lifted, Emma, seems almost zero at this point because all the states and territories and the federal government have to agree for that ban to be lifted. Still, Senator David Leyonhjelm, who kicked all of this off, is confident that the tide is changing on Australia's tough gun laws, and he took us to a gun range just north of Canberra to try to convince us. G'day, mate.
How are you?
Good. Here we are. Parliament's done for the night.
Yeah, having a bit of fun.
All right, let's go shooting.
Have you ever shot before?
Yeah.
What do you get out of shooting? What do you enjoy?
My favourite is rifle shooting, and I like the fact that I can shoot from quite a long distance and get a target and get the shots, 10 shots, 20 shots, into a very small area. It's not unlike golf.
Leaning forward on your front foot, you're going to put your bottom cartridge in and then close the gun with the barrels pointing forward. Push the gun forward, bring it back into your shoulder so you've got your good sight position.
It's a fascinating sport. There are variables in it, like any other sport. Paul.
That was very, very close.
Was it?
Yep.
I missed out on hand-eye coordination when it was being handed out.
Okay.
So I'm not much good at tennis and you know, fast sports that require a lot of fast coordination. You know, there's no point in me trying to get good at those sort of sports, but I can get quite good. I am quite good, as a matter of fact, at very, very slow, considered, careful precision shooting. I've won my grade in state championships in a version of pistol shooting like that. I'm pretty handy with long-range rifle shooting. So you go for the things that you're good at. All right, see if I get this little sucker. Pull. There are never any accidents on shooting ranges, or practically never, because we're all so well aware of the fact that in the wrong place, if you're in the wrong place, you can get hurt. And nobody wants that. We want to have a safe sport. Excellent. Sounds good to me.
Do you ever hunt?
Yes. I'm not a very enthusiastic hunter because you've got to do a lot of walking. And I'm 64 now, and I figure other people can do that. But yes, I mean, I have a farm in central west New South Wales, and there are rabbits and foxes and pigs on it, and I occasionally knock one over. And I feel I'm being a practical environmentalist when I do that, because they're a pest. Pull!
No trips to Africa though, there's no big
That
games.
kind of safari hunting, that's really for a very small group of people, that kind of safari hunting. It's not something that's ever appealed to me. And I'm a free choice person, so I don't dismiss other people wanting to do it, but it never appealed to me. Pull!
Yeah!
My normal record is 50%.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'm not a shotgun shooter,
Well,
trust me.
I'm sure we can edit that to be 50% tonight. It'll be just fine.
That's right, yes.
So David, the gun we just shot obviously can fire 2 rounds. Why do we need a gun?
Australia has the stricter gun laws at the moment, but that's probably going to change soon with the ban they're going to bring in.
It's easier than reloading.
In New Zealand. I'm actually in New Zealand.
So after 2 shots you have to reload it. If you have 5 or 7 rounds in the magazine, you can, when you see another rabbit, you just have to move the lever action and fire again.
Because farmers have said in the last couple of days that you don't really need any more than a couple of rounds, even for hunting. And people who are professional pest hunters use a rifle, so they sort of beg to differ, don't they?
Yeah. Yes, lever action shotguns have been around for over 100 years. So we're not talking about something new. And yes, the lever action rifles are also quite popular, but they're not everybody's cup of tea. Some people like them, some people don't. I don't own a lever action shotgun myself, but the issue is if there's no compelling reason why you shouldn't have it, then the onus is on those who want to ban things to provide that reason, that onus.
Isn't the compelling reason though that there is a greater risk if you've got a weapon that can fire 8 rounds very quickly, that if it's falling into the wrong hands, it's much more dangerous than a weapon that can fire 2 rounds?
Well, any gun in the wrong hands can be dangerous and it can be misused, any gun at all. There's never, to my knowledge, been any crime committed with a lever action shotgun. As far as I'm aware, it's never been used in any mass shooting, any bank hold-ups, or anything like that. You can't even saw the barrel off. A double-barreled shotgun, such as we were shooting just now, you can saw the barrel off and make it short. Man Monis in the Lint Cafe siege used a sawn-off double-barreled shotgun. They can be very dangerous. You can't saw off a lever-action shotgun because you also cut the magazine.
You would have to agree that most people in Australia don't like guns.
Yeah. I acknowledge most people don't like guns. They're not familiar with them. They've had no experience with them. Unless you've been exposed to them, unless you've had
response. That work is already underway. Today, as the country grieves, we are seeking answers. I want to speak specifically about the firearms used in this terrorist act. I'm advised that there were 5 guns used by the primary perpetrator. There were 2 semi-automatic weapons and 2 shotguns. The offender was in possession of a gun licence. I'm advised that this was acquired in November of 2017. A lever-action firearm was also found. While work is being done as to the chain of events that led to both the holding of this gun licence and the possession of these weapons, I can tell you one thing right now: our gun laws will change. There have been attempts to change our laws in 2005, 2012, and after an inquiry in 2017. Now is the time for change. There are obviously questions being asked of how this person was able to enter the country and undertake this act of terror. I have instructed ODS to report to Cabinet on Monday on this sequence of events with a view to strengthening our systems on a range of fronts, including but not limited to firearms, border controls, enhanced information sharing with Australia, and any practical reinforcement of our watch list processes. I want to come now to what people can expect over the course of the day and beyond. The safety of New Zealanders is our highest priority. New Zealand police remain on high alert. Christchurch residents are strongly urged to stay home if possible and stay safe. Please monitor the police website and social media for further information. If you see something suspicious, then please call 111 immediately. A number of events are being held across the country today, and there will be an increased police presence. Police have additional patrols out on the streets of Christchurch to reassure the community. They have flown in 45 additional police staff to Christchurch, with a further 80 staff arriving today. The additional police staffing includes public safety teams, detectives, tactical specialists and intelligence support. Staff from other DHBs have offered support as required. There will be additional support provided in Christchurch for mental health and psychosocial needs. If anyone needs to speak to someone, or if they're feeling distressed in any way, I encourage you to call or text 1737. There are extra staff available. That number to call or text again is 1737, and that line is available to anyone, whether they've been directly involved in these incidents, whether they're residents of Christchurch or not, anyone in New Zealand who's feeling any kind of distress. The police are aware of distressing material relating to this event being online and are reminding people it is an offence to distribute objectionable material. I want to touch briefly on activity to date and the response that occurred yesterday. So just to recap. Police immediately secured the areas involved and ensured that people were kept safe, including schools and offices being locked down. Police made arrests swiftly, and as I've said, a man will appear in court this morning. Defence specialists quickly moved to assist police to make the improvised explosive devices safe. I want to make special mention of those who are involved in both the parts of the operation involving disarming explosive devices, but also undertaking the arrests themselves. Many of you may have seen the footage of the arrests, and I can only describe it as an act of bravery on behalf of all New Zealanders, and an act that showed very little regard for their own personal safety. I'm sure everyone in New Zealand wants the acknowledgement of the police, but particularly the police officer who made that critical arrest yesterday. I also want to acknowledge ambulance staff who many will have seen acting swiftly under horrific conditions, and all medical staff who continue to work with those who are injured. New Zealand Defence Force at Burnham Camp yesterday were put on.
Upset by this.
A lot of work ahead of them.
I'm at one of the scenes right now. This is the scene.
They are assisting to repatriate them with their loved ones.
And you've been listening to the Prime Minister of New
Zealand, Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, Indonesia and Malaysia. MFAT staff are dealing with offers of assistance and, of course, receiving a significant number of condolence messages. Deputy Commissioner Māori and Ethnic Services Wally Homaha has travelled to Christchurch alongside 15 additional ethnic liaison officers to support the community. These specialists will work alongside local staff to support the families involved. They are assisting to repatriate them
And you've been listening to the Prime Minister of New Zealand give us an update here. Daniel Sutton from our partner network 10 in Australia joins me now from Christchurch, New Zealand. Daniel, what new information did we learn now from the Prime Minister?
Well, she has confirmed that the accused gunman will be facing court just in the next 30 minutes or so here in Christchurch. The charge he is facing is a murder charge, but there are so many victims attached to that charge. The death toll is 49 people and there are still 48 in hospital, 20 of them seriously injured. We have also learnt this morning that a 4-year-old boy is among those who is being treated by emergency services.
I cannot say anything until I first say a word of thanks to the Prime Minister of Hungary for being with us here today, to our comrade, the party leader, and to our hosts, our organisers, our comrades, Societas. Give it up again for Societas! In the world you come from, no matter how small your organisation or your country or your movement may be, remember that you have comrades around the world fighting for the same principles, fighting for the same things. You have solidarity. Comrades, the second thing... Comrades, the second thing that I'm reminded of is more sombre, and that is that as a movement we have not won. And I don't just mean against the neoliberal agenda that we are all fighting. I mean that within our own organisations we are still fighting for our principles there too. And as long as we're in a place where we come to a UC festival and our women are harassed, we have not won. And as long as we come together as comrades and still see amongst ourselves our LGBT rights and our LGBT comrades are not respected by each and every one of us, then we have not won. But the third thing, comrades, and this is the message I also want us all to take away, the third thing is that we are a strong, bold and courageous movement. We have come together here at this festival and discussed the principles which we all hold true. Social justice, equality, peace, and everything else that we have continued to strive for in our countries. But the time has now come to move beyond rhetoric. That takes courage. And UC has always demonstrated that courage. It was UC who said, why is Western Sahara, after all this time, all this injustice, why are they not free? Comrades, it was UC who went to the Socialist International and said to our mother parties, it is time the Polisario was recognised by our own family.
So, I got beat up on, but I can tell you it's nothing in comparison to the beating up I've given myself.
Let me tell you a story about Pants Down Brown. He got voted in as mayor.
And unelected technocrats in the United Nations. New Zealand has consistently been an economically most free countries for many years. An agreement that seeks to, quote, harmonise migration policy with corrupt dictatorships will be disastrous for our country. I could safely speculate that if all nations of the world were to implement this compact, we will not see record-setting waves of migration to Belarus or the Democratic Republic of Congo. The PACT supporters say there's no need to be concerned about this agreement because it is non-binding. In that case, why sign a harmless piece of window dressing at all? This is a democratic country. Governments change. And who can know whether a future government will shrug off this pact as being non-binding or incorporate it as a paramount part of their foreign policy? I will not be part of handing a revolver pointed straight back at me to future governments. Now, there are several of the 23 objectives in this agreement that have been drawn up in the usual aspirational, warm, fuzzy, diplomatic language of the UN that do not survive an educated reading between the lines. Objective 15 is called Provide Access to Basic Services for Migrants. Now, currently you have to be a resident or a citizen to access taxpayer-funded services from our government. For example, if you're not a resident and you need to use a public hospital, you pay for the service. That is completely reasonable. Now, if you're like me, you welcome immigrants because they will usually take independent initiative to come here for a better life, and they'll use their own resources to make their lives better themselves. Objective 15 tips this on its head, giving public health care, all levels of public education and wraparound assistance by the government to access these services. When Michael Joseph Savage implemented cradle-to-grave welfare state, he would never have imagined that it would become an international welfare system, airport to airport, for any person that shows up on our doorstep. Objective 16 is entitled Empower Migrants and Societies to Realise.
This is Angelica, Austin, and Yami. In their first 60 days of starting an e-commerce entrepreneurship business.
Hands raised. Which one of you would rather be forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term?
I would. I would.
Time for the latest installment of Change My Mind, where we rationalize our positions on controversial topics. This week is the fourth installment of our recent abortion-themed series. Of course, it's been all over the media, given the recent laws regarding late-term abortion.
It's dangerous to put any kind of limitations or controls around that, because she in the end is the one responsible for that and those circumstances, and I don't think that it's entirely fair to judge them.
A fetus is literally a parasite. Like, it is sucking the life from a mother.
Yeah.
Every single day. Like, that's literally what happens. That's not even like...
Not a mother, I'm guessing.
Like,
when it comes to women's rights with respect to their reproduction, I think you should leave it to women.
This is about a woman's right to choose, and you as a man should not have a single say in that.
As per usual, let me know what you think by sounding off in the comment section below. I'll tell you, on this topic, I was a little surprised by how extreme most people's positions were on the issue. Here, see for yourself.
Hi, what's your name?
Mitch.
Mitch? Stephen, nice to meet you.
Good
Mitch.
to meet you, man.
I have no idea whether you're familiar or not with the segment that we do, but it's basically an opportunity to rationalize one's position. I'm pro-life, and all that would encompass here. I guess you probably understand where I line up. If you disagree with me or think there's anything wrong with my position, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
I do think there's a lot wrong with your position. If you're going to try to tell more than half the world's population, more than half of America's population, that they are not allowed to decide to do with their bodies what they want to do, but a dead body, if they're not an organ donor, they're not going to get harvested, for organ donation, then I think that's really messed up. And frankly, I think that women should have the option, legally and otherwise, to be able to get an abortion if they want to.
Okay, there are a few presumptions there. No, I would never tell 50% of America, as you put it, about half of America, what they can and can't do with their own bodies.
But that's exactly what the pro-life argument is. You're going to make abortions illegal, which then is going to force the women of America to either find a way to get an illegal abortion, which has its own host of problems, both medical, legal, etc.
As abortion does.
A safe abortion doesn't.
Sure it does.
What things are medically wrong with a medical abortion?
For the baby being killed.
Okay, I'm not talking about the baby.
Why not?
Because the simple fact of the matter is the baby is not an autonomous living being.
Really? How so?
Because it cannot fend for itself.
Okay, so would a 2-month-old baby not be an autonomous human being?
We're not talking about a 2-month-old baby. We're talking about a fetus.
Well, no, I'm using your definition. You said cannot fend for itself. So is fending for itself the standard of what constitutes a human being?
No.
Okay, so what constitutes a human being?
The fact that it is born.
Okay. So what makes the difference between a human being and not a human being is 7 inches about the birth canal?
Yeah.
Okay. So you would be okay with abortion all the way up to 9 months?
In certain circumstances, yeah.
Okay. What do you mean in certain circumstances?
If the birth would be fatal to either the mother or the fetus, then I do think that abortion should be legal.
Well, sure. Let's say if the birth would kill the mother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know any major pro-life advocates who wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah, I've met quite a few, actually.
No, I have yet to meet one. So maybe you can give me your Rolodex. But I certainly would say if you're looking at a direct threat to the life of the mother, yes, I understand that.
Okay,
but let me say, it sounds to me like that doesn't really matter because you would support abortion regardless.
Yes.
Okay, so why bring it up?
Because people, especially in America, have the freedom to make choices, and right now, the pro-life argument is trying to infringe upon one of the choices. And quick question for all the women: can y'all raise your hand real quick? No. Seriously, can I get all the women to raise your hands real quick and keep them raised? I don't care if it's one-on-one. Of all of those women that have their hands raised, which one of you would rather be forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term?
I would. I don't live in
I appreciate it. No, hold on a second. I appreciate it. I really do appreciate it. But I also want to continue with this. Thank you very much. I appreciate your passion. That's the danger of using mob rule as your moral compass. Sometimes you don't like how it turns out. And I could have actually told you that there's a significant amount of pro-life women here. A couple of things I want to clarify. I would never tell a woman what she can and can't do with her own body. That's not what I am doing.
Okay.
That's not what she is doing. And I would never force a woman to carry a child.
Okay.
Okay.
But that's exactly what the pro-life stance is.
No, it's not.
So what about the pro-life argument and pro-life laws and regulations and all that is going to allow women the choice? Because that's the whole basis of the pro-choice argument.
Right. Yeah, that's a false premise. What laws would allow the choice to kill another human being?
But it's not a human being.
Well, it is a human being. How do you define a human being? You said fend for itself. That's not a consistent line to draw.
And that's 7 inches of birth canal, as you said.
Well, you said you didn't agree earlier.
No.
Fending for itself. So, in other words,
no.
up until 9 months,
it's not a living human being until it crosses that birth canal.
Okay. Why?
Why? Because it's still in the womb. It is still a fetus.
So, well, hold on a second. So we're talking about right now a 9-month-old baby. Let's say 8-month-old, right?
But it's not a baby until it's born.
It's not a baby until it's born. So the only difference right now, I'm using a 9-month as let's pick an 8-month-old, okay? 8 months inside the womb, 8 months outside of the womb. One is a life and one is not?
Yeah.
Okay. So what determines human life is location?
If a woman has an 8-month-old fetus versus an 8-month-old child, that is a huge difference.
Because one is inside the womb, one is outside. The only difference is, let's call it geographical location.
But it's not the same as geographical location.
Okay, it's a location inside a womb or outside a womb.
But you're oversimplifying it.
I'm trying to understand. Okay, why is one a life and one is not?
Because the fetus itself is wholly and totally dependent upon the mother that it is attached to via umbilical cord.
Sure.
Right?
Wholly dependent, very much
wholly
just
dependent
just like an 8-month-old born outside of the womb born.
However, the 8-month-old child, the infant at that point, that's the important distinction, fetus versus infant,
It's your important distinction. I don't think it's a consistent one, but continue.
Is the fact that a fetus, which has not been born yet, and an infant, which has been born, in my opinion, it shouldn't matter whether or not the mother wants to keep it or not. Whether it's...
But I guess I'm not following you. Why does that determine the value of human life? Is it because you don't believe it's a human being because you believe it's a part of the mother?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you don't believe that is a separate human being. You believe it's effectively a part of the mother.
Yes, because up until the point that it is outside of the mother, whether it's C-section, birth, whatever, then at that point it becomes its own living human being.
Okay. I'm trying
that is still dependent upon other people because it is an infant.
Okay. So
but it doesn't necessarily need to be the mother, biological mother, that is still hooked up to the umbilical cord to fend.
So I want to make sure that I'm understanding your reasoning for why it is a baby outside versus inside the womb, even though it's the same age. You are saying that location, and that determines whether it's a human life because, in fact, when it's inside the womb, it is not a separate human being. It is a part of the mother.
Yes.
Okay. I've not misrepresented you there. I understand you correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. So an 8-month-old baby inside of the mother.
An 8-month-old fetus.
8-month-old fetus. It's not a person inside the mother. Okay. How many feet does the mom have?
Sorry?
How many feet does the mother have?
2.
Not 4?
Not 4.
How many fingers does she have?
10.
Not 20?
No. Infants are likened to...
it's a part of the mother.
Yeah.
It's a part of the mother. The mother would have 20 fingers, 20 toes, 4 arms, 4 legs.
Okay.
So if it's a boy, does the mother have a penis?
You're trying to detract from the fact that...
No, I'm trying to understand your position. I'm not trying to detract.
Hear me out. So, effectively, it is a parasitic relationship between a fetus and a woman.
Define parasite.
Parasite is a being that is wholly and totally dependent upon its host.
That's actually not the definition of a parasite.
Okay, so what's the definition of a parasite, Mr. Webster?
I appreciate the presumption. No, actually, because by your definition, a fully born child would be a parasite because they're entirely dependent on somebody. A good example of that, for example, with sharks, remoras aren't considered parasites, even though they are dependent upon the food that they would get from their larger predator. So the reason here is because it actually does so at the cost of its host, at the cost of the health care of the host, at the cost of the actual ability, often killing the host. That's what a parasite is. And parasites don't necessarily even have to be inside the body, by the way. They can be on or in.
I'm aware of that.
No medical literature would refer to a baby growing in a woman's body as a parasite. That's an opinion.
Okay.
That's
my opinion.
It's your opinion, but it's also your opinion that it is a part of the woman's body, but that doesn't seem to... I understand how you sort of juxtapose that next to, but the woman only has 2 feet.
Yeah.
The woman only has 20. So what are those fingers on that baby? What's the penis? Who does it belong to?
It belongs to the fetus, which, like we just said,
so
in my opinion...
the fetus does have body autonomy from the mother at this point. It is not a part of the mother.
No, it is a part of the mother. Because
so the mother
it is
has
still
a penis.
attached to the mother.
Does the mother have a penis?
No, because the fetus is a parasite.
Because the fetus is a parasite?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to follow your logic trail here because before you said it was in fact a part of the mother.
It is.
That was what.
It is.
Now you're saying it's a parasite.
Why can't it be both?
No, I suppose it could be both. Okay. So it's a parasitic part of the mother.
Yes.
So the penis belongs to a parasite, or the arms and the legs and the feet and the functioning brain and the central nervous system and the ability to understand and recognize its mother's voice belongs to a parasite fetus that is in the mother and is not a human life.
Yes.
And that is why we have the right to kill it.
Yes.
Okay. All the way up until birth.
Like I said before, if it is going to be a fatality to either the baby at that point, the infant, or the mother.
Yeah, well, no, again, we don't need to discuss that because you don't care anyway.
That's a very, very strong assumption to make.
Well, you said earlier that you would support abortion regardless, all right?
Yes.
Okay. So then why bring up whether it's a threat of the health to the mother?
Because no medical professional is going to make a late-term abortion unless it's going to be a fatality to either the mother or the fetus.
That's not true. It happens all the time.
Name one case where that's happened.
10 to 12,000 a year, 1.6%, 1.3 to 1.6% of about 1 million abortions each year. And as a matter of fact, you can go right now and watch a video that we taped in an abortion clinic on Tuesday where they performed an abortion on a 32-week-old baby, no questions asked.
Okay, and...
It happens all the time.
Okay.
So, do you disagree with that?
Yeah.
You do disagree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, then we find some common ground there.
Because you... No. I disagree with your stance on it, because you don't know what that woman's life... Like, you don't know that woman's life, you don't know that woman, you don't know what the circumstances are, you don't know anything about her. Do you?
Yeah, I do.
You know her personally?
I know exactly what her circumstances are because she told them to us, yeah. She was a woman who had 2 children already, a 6- and a 9-year-old, and the youngest of which was now being sent off to kindergarten, and she didn't want to go through the mommy phase again.
Okay.
She wanted time for herself.
Okay.
So she went in, and they provided a 32-week-old abortion, no questions asked. That happens, late-term abortions, 10 to 12,000 a year.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure, because you jump around as to what's permissible and what's not. My line of logic here is whether you like it or not, it is consistent, along with the lady there who responded to you. A unique new genetic code is created at conception.
Okay.
Right? Sounds to me like you're saying whether it's in, whether it's out, depending on how the mother feels about the baby, it's circumstantial. It's just not a logically consistent way to justify killing another life.
Okay. Well,
but in that situation, is abortion okay? The situation I just described for you, you can go watch it right now.
Yeah.
Well, then let's not go to the extreme examples to make a point. Because if I were to say, hey, rape, incest, let's allow abortions, and say, but on the other side of the coin, would you be okay with making it illegal to perform other abortions? You wouldn't say so. So why bring it up? You bring up an extreme example that you don't care about. You support abortion all the way up until birth, no matter what. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're an M&M. There's no point in wondering where your pockets are tasting smooth.
Would you want to come in for just 2 seconds to kind of describe why you... Well, usually it's mostly people who disagree, but...
We don't usually do this at Change My Mind, but because this young lady was so passionate and because her opinion would seem so unpopular, I wanted to hear what she had to say. Hear for yourself.
What's your name?
My name is Glenn Elise.
Glenn Elise. All right. Glenn Elise, we can't take super long because usually we try to give the right of way to people who disagree.
Absolutely.
But, right after you did it, you were like, oh, I'm so sorry, which I appreciate. You don't have to be apologetic, but he tossed to the audience, our previous speaker, and said how many women here would want to be forced to carry